Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Today, doing a Q&A video on one of the questions that I do get asked a lot, and that is, why do you use Fujifilm gear? That's a fair question. So, without any further ado, how come I use Fujifilm equipment?
Battalion 2, Engines, 11, 27, 7, and 22, Investigator 1, Ladder 27, and Safety 1, House Fire, CO1 Maple Street, Army, Echo, Battalion 2, Engines, 11, 27.
So, I wanted to go through the decision-making process I went through when I was looking at upgrading or going to a mirrorless camera system, and what did I consider, what was important, and how did I ultimately come to the decision I came to, which is Fujifilm. So let's talk about the process. And again, I've talked about some of the questions you sort of need to ask yourself in a previous video, but let's run through them and see what we got. In this video, I wanted to focus a little bit more on the cameras and not necessarily on me. So I wanted to change the perspective so you could see the equipment as I was explaining it. However, as I look at them sitting on my desk, I realize my desk is a little messy and could be a little distracting. So let's change the set, if you will. There, that's a little better and a little cleaner. So, as I've discussed in a couple of previous videos, I have a fair amount of experience with old 35mm SLR cameras and had always been a pretty diehard committed Nikon user. I found their equipment to be high quality and extraordinarily reliable. My first instinct was to simply go get a Nikon digital camera. However, after thinking about that, I decided maybe since we were sort of starting all over again from scratch, I would do a little more thorough research and look at all the potential options. So I had to ask myself all those questions that I have posed to you in a previous video. First of all, what kind of camera do you want? Do you want a mirrorless or a DSLR? And since I was going into this, might as well get the newest, greatest, and I was thinking mirrorless is where I'd want to be. Once I'd picked mirrorless, then I had to decide on full frame versus crop sensor. And while my initial thought was to go full frame, that seemed to be what most places were recommending and seemed to be what most professional photographers were using. I realized that full frame was going to cost more and also resulted in bigger, bulkier cameras. The low light advantage for full frame also wasn't as important because basically I was just photographing fire apparatus and typically doing that during the day. So I didn't think that was as important for my needs. I also liked that the crop sensor actually gave a little extra extended reach or effective reach for longer lenses, which I thought might be of value or benefit. But really the biggest advantage to crop sensor was going to be cost. I was retiring. I didn't want to be spending a whole lot of money, so budget was definitely going to impact my decision. Once I had decided that crop sensor cameras were going to be fine, then I had to select a brand, and really what became important was the availability of lenses that would work on the camera. Some of the manufacturers were clearly more focused on their full-frame cameras, and so a lot of their newer lenses were lenses designed for full-frame cameras, and I was concerned that there weren't a lot of APS-C lenses available, and I was not sure how many more were going to be introduced in the coming years. That is when I first started looking at Fujifilm, since they basically were focused on crop sensor cameras and didn't actually have a full frame camera available. As I started learning more about the Fujifilm cameras, I found out a couple of important things. First, their image quality and colors seem to consistently get high marks And Fujifilm also had a fair amount of film simulations that were readily available. And I thought this would be an advantage since initially I wasn't interested in doing any post-processing. I basically wanted to be able to get digital images out of the camera straight to my social media accounts. The other thing I liked about Fujifilm was a lot of their cameras featured sort of the old style dials with shutter speeds, an aperture ring, and an ISO dial on the camera like the old SLR cameras. Since I was fairly familiar and comfortable with that, I thought that might be a good way for me to go. These types of controls would allow me to take pictures in a way or a style that I was comfortable with and had done in the past using film cameras. With those considerations in mind, I started looking at the Fujifilm XT series. At the time, it was the XT4 or maybe one of the smaller XT10 or XT20 cameras as a possible first choice for my mirrorless camera. However, around that time, Fujifilm came out with the XS10 camera. This camera was a little bit of a departure from what they had been offering. Most notably, you can look at the dial and you see, rather than the old shutter, exposure, and ISO dial, it featured the more standard PASM dial, if you will, that you find on a lot of modern digital cameras. The camera was also highly rated for its video, and I thought that would be important, and had many of the Fujifilm film sims actually built into the camera. The best thing about it was probably the price, though. It was, again, a relatively small camera, but one that I could purchase the body for, at the time, under $1,000. It gave me all the features and options I was looking for, the film sims, the video capability, and had a good size sensor at the time, a 26 megapixel sensor. So after a lot of soul searching and anguishing, which is what I typically do when I'm making a large purchase, I finally purchased the Fujifilm XS10 in 2022. The camera turned out to be a great choice. It did everything I want. I was getting great images from it. I really liked the camera. It's compact, easy to use, produces great looking images. The size of the sensor gives me a lot of detail so I can crop in. And again, I had the option to buy several Fujifilm lenses, which I found to be really excellent lenses. A couple of things about the XS10 as I started using it. One is I figured out that I really like processing photos. And after starting out shooting JPEGs and posting those straight out of the camera, I started shooting raw images and using Capture One as a photo editing software. And as it turned out, really enjoy that. The other thing I learned was the video wasn't as important as I thought it was going to be. I've mentioned this in other videos that I don't shoot a lot of videos. Some of the stuff I shoot on my phone. So the video capability built into the XS10, I'm not sure I was using it to its full advantage. I was using this camera for certainly well over a year when I had an opportunity to buy a used XT1 camera, which is the more classic Fujifilm with the separate dials, at a really good price. And so I decided to purchase that camera just to try it out and see what I thought. The XT1 is the first generation, so it's probably 10 years old. The sensor size is small compared to my XS10, down I think it's 9 or 10 megapixels. But it did have all the unique controls that a lot of the fans of Fujifilm equipment seem to really rave about. And I can say, after purchasing that camera and using it, I understand why. I loved using the XT1. I like the controls. I like the way it was set up. Again, it's a good, small, compact camera. And the image quality out of the camera is just fantastic. I think the colors look really great. For example, this picture of Concorde's Ladder 11 is one of my favorites. Certainly, the old technology, it is a little slow. In continuous shooting, the autofocus works okay. But again, for what I was using it for, it was really a great camera, and I really enjoyed using the XT1. So I'd been shooting with the XT1 for most of my pictures in the field. If I went out at night, I took the XS10, take advantage of the technology upgrades. But as I've said before, I'm a bit of a gear guy, and so I was already trying to figure out what my next camera was going to be. Obviously, I was pretty heavily invested in the Fujifilm ecosystem, so I was going to stay with Fujifilm. And really, it was down to two cameras, the Fujifilm XT5 or the Fujifilm XH2. Both these cameras were introduced about a year ago, and the internal technology is pretty similar. They both have 40 megapixel sensors, and again, sort of obsessing with clarity and detail. I really like that. You know, both had in-body stabilization. Both cameras had weather sealing. Both were fairly high speed, had the newest autofocus, so that was getting pretty good. The XH2 was probably a little more video capable, but again, I wasn't that interested in the video capabilities. And certainly the XT5 has very good video features. But really, the difference in the cameras as far as when I was looking at them, that made a difference to me. And you can see from the screenshots I'm showing you from cameradecision.com, which is a great website to just physically compare different cameras. Really, the difference between the XH2 and the XT5 is the layout and how they're set up for the users. The XT5 is a traditional Fujifilm camera with an ISO dial, a shutter speed dial, an exposure compensation dial. The aperture is set typically using the aperture ring on your lens, while the XH2 is the newer style. It is much like my XS10. It's got the PASM or the PASM dial, depending on which way you read the letters. So it really became a question of whether I preferred the traditional camera features or wanted the newer style controls like you'd find on a lot of other digital cameras, and the same as my XS10. After using the XT1, it really wasn't a very hard decision. And fortunately for me, for Christmas, I got a new Fujifilm XT5 camera. So this is my new XT5. And again, I've gone through these, but the things I like about it, starting with the styling, it's kind of retro in that it looks like an old 35 millimeter camera. It's relatively small. It's relatively compact. I think the ergonomics are pretty good. The ergonomics on the XS10 are great, but they're still pretty good on the XT5. I've been happy with the lenses. Sort of at last count, Fujifilm has about 90 different lenses for their X series cameras, and a growing number of third-party lens manufacturers are now making X-mount lenses. So there's a lot of great options when it comes to choosing lenses. I like the old style analog controls on the XT5. I can get out of my car and just looking at the top of my camera, I can set it up so that I'll be relatively close to a properly exposed photo without even having to raise the camera and start using the metering system. So I like that I can see the shutter speed, I can see what the aperture is set to without having to go through a display or look through the viewfinder to read those details. I'm very happy with the image quality. I will talk about how I process my photos in another video, but I can say I'm really happy with the photos I've been getting from all the X series cameras from Fujifilm. I'm not sure there's any great dislikes or negatives about any of these cameras. And as I have discussed before, I think one of the real advantages of the Fujifilm X series, the crop sensor cameras, is it's their primary focus. They're all in on crop sensors, so I don't think it's going anywhere. And the price is pretty reasonable. When I was looking at either the XT5 or the XH2, those are really their top of the line crop sensor cameras, and you can purchase both of those bodies, brand new for under $2,000. So hopefully that added a little clarity about why I use the equipment I use. Again, I've been using it for a couple years now. I'm really happy with it, really like it. It's not the only choice. I'm sure I'd be happy with almost any brand of camera equipment, but I do like using the Fujifilm stuff. If you have any thoughts or comments, I'd love to hear them. Certainly, why you chose the brand you use. Would you change? Would you stay with it? Please feel free to leave those comments below. Love to hear that. Otherwise, I would just ask that you'll like and subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you again in the next video. Thanks. Bye.